The morning I found my name gone from that account, I had driven myself to the bank to deposit $40. It was a Tuesday in March, cold enough that the parking lot still had frost along the edges near the curb. I had parked in the same spot I always used, the one closest to the side entrance, because Lorraine had always said that spot was easier on my knee. I still park there. I do not know why I still follow the rules of a person who is no longer here, but I do, and I think I always will. I walked to the teller window with the deposit slip already filled out. The account number was written in my handwriting at the top, the same number I had memorized 2 decades ago when Lorraine and I sat across from a young bank officer named Mister Hensley and signed the original account card together. Lorraine had worn her blue coat that day. She had brought a pen from home because she said bank pens were never reliable. The teller looked at my slip, looked at her screen, and then looked up at me with an expression I did not immediately understand. She said, "Mr. Calloway, I am not seeing your name associated with this account." I told her the account number again. She checked again. She called a colleague over. They spoke in low voices, and I stood at the window, holding my $40 and my deposit slip and trying to understand what I was hearing. My name was not on the account I had opened with my wife 20 years ago, the account where we had deposited the money from the hardware store every Friday for most of those years, the account Lorraine had balanced every first of the month in that small green ledger she kept in the kitchen drawer next to the dish towels. I did not raise my voice at the teller. I thanked her and stepped away from the window and sat down in one of the chairs near the door, the kind of chair banks keep for people who need a moment. I sat there for a while. My son Derek had called me the week before about what he described as some routine account paperwork. He said it was related to settling the last of his mother estate. He said I did not need to come in, that he had handled everything on my behalf to save me the trouble. He said it the way he often said things to me lately, slowly, with a certain careful patience that I had begun to recognize as something other than kindness. I had thanked him. I had told him he was a good son for handling it. Now I sat in that bank chair with $40 in my hand, and I thought about the green ledger in the kitchen drawer. Lorraine had kept photocopies of important documents inside the back cover, folded flat and tucked beneath the cardboard. She had done this quietly without announcing it, because that was how Lorraine handled the things she considered serious. She did not make speeches. She made copies. I thought about the original account card. I thought about her blue coat and the pen she had brought from home. I thought about my son calling that paperwork routine. The frost in the parking lot had not fully melted by the time I walked back to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. I was not angry yet. I was trying to understand why Derek had needed my name removed before he had told me that his mother's savings in that account were almost entirely gone. That was the question I carried home with me. That was the question that would take me the better part of a season to fully answer. I did not call Derek that afternoon. I came home, hung my coat on the hook by the door, and went to the kitchen. I filled the kettle and set it on the burner the way I do every afternoon, and then I stood at the counter and looked at the drawer next to the dish towels. The green ledger was there. It had been there since the week after Lorraine passed, when I had opened that drawer looking for a rubber band and seen it sitting on top of a folded dish towel, small and worn at the corners, the cover soft from years of handling. I had closed the drawer without touching it. I was not ready then. I pulled the drawer open and took the ledger out and set it on the kitchen table. It was smaller than I remembered. Lorraine had kept it so neatly that I had always imagined it as something more substantial. The cover was a faded green, the color of old dollar bills. Her handwriting was on the first page in blue ink, careful and unhurried, the way she wrote everything. The date at the top of the first page was from 20 years ago, 2 weeks after we had opened the account. She had written the opening balance. She had written the date of the deposit. She had written the name of the branch. I turned the pages slowly. Every first of the month for 20 years. Every balance recorded in the same blue ink, the same unhurried handwriting. Some months had notes beside the entry. New furnace installed, balance drawn down. Derek car loan paid off, do not let him know we helped. Hardware store slow in January, do not worry. Raymond knee surgery covered, thank God for the savings. I sat at that table for a long time reading my wife handwriting. I had known Lorraine for 49 years. I had been married to her for 47 of them. I thought I knew every habit she had, every small system she kept, every quiet way she managed the life we shared. But reading those notes beside the monthly balances, I understood that she had been watching over things with a care I had not fully seen while she was alive, because she had never needed me to see it. She had simply done it. I turned to the back of the ledger. The inside back cover had a flap of cardboard, the kind that forms a small pocket. Lorraine had tucked documents inside it, folded flat and precise, edges aligned. I removed them carefully and laid them on the table. There were 4 documents. The first was a photocopy of the original account card from the day we had opened the account. Both names were printed at the top: Raymond Allen Calloway, Lorraine May Calloway. The account number matched the number I had written on my deposit slip that morning. At the bottom of the card was the signature line. My signature on the left, Lorraine's signature on the right. And below both signatures, a line I had forgotten was there, a line that read, "Changes to account authorization require the written consent of both named account holders or surviving holder upon verified death certificate submission." I read that line twice. Then I read it a third time. Lorraine had not died without a death certificate being filed. That had been handled by the funeral home within days of her passing. Derek had offered to coordinate with the funeral home. He had said it was the least he could do. He had been thorough about it, I remembered, more thorough than I had expected, calling me afterward to confirm that everything had been submitted. I set the account card copy aside and looked at the second document. It was a copy of the bank statement from the month Lorraine died. The balance at that time had been $41,000 and some dollars. I had known there were savings. I had not known the exact number, because Lorraine had managed that account, and I had trusted her completely, and seen no reason to monitor what she was already watching carefully. $41,000. I looked at the third document. It was a letter Lorraine had written to me in her own handwriting, sealed inside a small envelope she had labeled with my name. I did not know this letter existed. I sat very still when I saw my name in her handwriting on that envelope. I set it aside without opening it. I was not ready to open it in that moment. I needed to finish looking at what was in the ledger first. The fourth document was a business card from the bank branch. The name of the branch manager printed on the front. On the back, in Lorraine handwriting, she had written a single line: "If anything ever seems wrong with this account, start here." I turned that business card over in my fingers for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the light was going flat and gray the way it does in Ohio in March, when the afternoon decides it is already evening. I could hear the furnace running. I could hear the house settling the way old houses do in cold weather. I thought about Derek calling that paperwork routine. I thought about him offering to coordinate with the funeral home, to handle the death certificate submission, to save me the trouble. I thought about the phrase on that original account card, written consent of both named account holders or surviving holder upon verified death certificate submission. I had not submitted anything. I had not signed anything. I had not visited the bank since the week of Lorraine's funeral, when I had been too tired to manage more than the basics. I looked at the branch manager name on the business card. Then I looked at the phone on the counter. I did not call Derek. I called Gerald Pitts instead. Gerald picked up on the second ring the way he always does, as if he has been sitting near the phone waiting for something to do, which at 71 and fully retired he probably has been. We had known each other for 33 years. Gerald had come to work at Callaway Hardware as a part-time stock clerk when he was in his late 30s, going through a divorce and needing steady hours. He had stayed for 22 years. He had been at the store the morning I opened it and the afternoon I closed it for the last time. He had known Lorraine nearly as long as he had known me, and he had sat in the front row at her funeral with his hat in his hands and his eyes red, which was the most emotion I had ever seen from Gerald in 3 decades. I told him I needed to talk. He said, "Come over or I come there." I said, "Come here." He was at my door in 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the stove the whole time I was waiting. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table and I laid the documents out in front of him, the same way I had laid them out for myself. I did not explain them first. I let him read them the way Lorraine had kept them, in order, without editorializing. Gerald read slowly. He had never been a fast reader, a fact he had mentioned without embarrassment many times over the years. He said reading carefully was more important than reading quickly, which was the kind of thing Gerald believed, and also happened to be true. When he finished reading the account card copy, he set it down and looked at me. He said, "Ray, I was there the day you and Lorraine opened this account." I told him I remembered. He said, "I drove you both because your truck was in the shop. Lorraine sat in the front seat, and you sat in the back, because she said your legs were too long for the back seat, and her coat would wrinkle if she sat back there. You both signed something at that bank." I sat in the lobby and read a magazine about fishing and waited. I said, "Do you remember which branch?" He said the name of the branch without hesitating. It was the same branch name written on Lorraine business card. Gerald picked up the business card and read the back in Lorraine handwriting and set it down again carefully, the way you set something down when you understand that it mattered to someone who is no longer able to say so themselves. He said, "What do you think Derek did?" I told him what I thought Derek had done. I said it plainly, the way I would have described a hardware problem to a customer, identifying the issue before discussing the repair. Someone had submitted a change of authority form to that bank. My name had been removed. The account number was the same account Lorraine and I had opened together. The balance when Lorraine died had been $41,000. I had not authorized any change. I had not signed anything since Lorraine funeral week, and what I had signed then had been the funeral home paperwork, which Gerald had witnessed because he had driven me that day as well, because my hands had not been steady enough to drive. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Derek called me about 3 weeks after the funeral. Said he was coordinating some financial matters for you. Said you had asked him to handle things. Said he just wanted to make sure I had not seen you sign anything at the bank recently." I looked at him. He said, I told him I had not. He thanked me and hung up. I thought it was a strange call, but I did not think much of it past that. 3 weeks after the funeral, I had not asked Derek to coordinate any financial matters. I had not mentioned Gerald's name to Derek in any context during that period. I had been sitting in this same kitchen, trying to understand how to be a person whose wife of 47 years was no longer in the house. I thought about why Derek would have needed to know whether Gerald had seen me sign anything at the bank. The answer was not complicated once I looked at it directly. Derek had needed to know whether there was a witness to any legitimate account change on my part. He had been checking whether the ground was clear before he moved. I got up and refilled both our cups without being asked. It was something I had done 10,000 times in my life, refilling a cup because a person needed it and there was no reason to make them ask. Lorraine had said once that small hospitality was a form of paying attention, and I had never forgotten that, even though I had never told her I remembered it. Gerald wrapped both hands around his cup the way he does in cold weather. He said, "What does the letter say?" "The one in her handwriting with your name on it." I told him I had not opened it yet. He nodded and did not push. We drank our coffee, and outside the kitchen window the last gray light of the afternoon settled into early dark the way it does in Ohio in March, reliable and unhurried, indifferent to whatever is happening inside the houses it falls away from. I thought about Derek's call to Gerald. I thought about the timing of it. 3 weeks after the funeral, before the ground had thawed enough for the grass to come back. I thought about the change of authority form that someone had submitted to the bank. To submit that form, someone would have needed documentation. They would have needed Lorraine's death certificate, which Derek had coordinated. They would have needed some form of authorization from the surviving account holder. I had not provided that authorization, which meant that either the bank had made a procedural error or someone had provided documentation that was not genuine. I thought about what kind of document could serve as authorization from a surviving account holder who had not actually authorized anything. I thought about my signature. The signature that existed on the original account card, on the hardware store closing paperwork, on the funeral home documents, on 31 years of business records stored in the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. Derek had grown up watching me run that store. He had watched me sign my name thousands of times. I set my coffee cup down. Gerald looked at me. I said, "I need to find out what form was submitted to that bank and what signature is on it." Gerald said, "Then I think we go to the bank together," I said. "Not yet. Not until I open the letter." I opened the letter the next morning. I had slept poorly, not from anxiety exactly, but from the particular restlessness that comes when your mind has located a problem and will not release it until something is resolved. I had lain in bed, listening to the furnace and the house, and the silence that had replaced Lorraine, breathing on the other side of the mattress, a silence I had still not fully made my peace with after 18 months. I got up at 5:30 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me. Lorraine had sealed it with the kind of care she brought to everything she considered important. The envelope was plain white, the kind from a box of 20 that we had kept in the desk drawer for 40 years. My name was written on the front in her blue ink. Raymond. Not Ray, the way most people called me. Raymond, the way she said it when she meant the full version of a thing. I opened it. The letter was 2 pages, written front and back on the same unlined paper she used for important correspondence, because she believed lined paper was for drafts and unlined paper was for things you meant. She began without preamble. That was Lorraine. She did not spend words on approach. She wrote, "Raymond, if you are reading this, then something has happened with the account, and I want you to understand that I expected it might. I am not writing this to alarm you. I am writing this because I know you and I know that when something goes wrong, you look for the practical explanation first and the deliberate one second. And in this case, I want you to look for the deliberate one first." I set the letter down and looked out the kitchen window for a moment. The yard was still brown and flat. A cardinal was sitting on the fence post near the garden bed. Lorraine had kept along the back of the yard. I picked the letter back up. She wrote that she had noticed things in the last year of her life that she had not told me because she had not wanted to burden me while she was unwell. She wrote that Derek had visited twice without telling me he was coming, on days when he knew I would be at my Thursday morning coffee with the men from the old Chamber of Commerce group. She wrote that on the second visit he had asked her questions about the account that she had found unsettling. Questions about what would happen to the balance when she was gone. Questions about whether I would be capable of managing finances on my own. Questions that were dressed in the language of concern, but that felt to her like something else. She wrote, "He asked me if I had ever considered putting him on the account to help you. I told him the account was ours, and that you were perfectly capable of managing your own money." He smiled and said of course and changed the subject. But Raymond, a person who asks that question once and accepts no for an answer, is concerned. A person who asks it a second time on a second visit is planning. I read that sentence 3 times. She went on. She wrote that she had gone to the bank 2 months before she died and spoken with the branch manager, whose name she had written on the business card. She had informed the manager that she and I were the only authorized holders of the account, and that any change to that authorization should require her physical presence, or, following her death, my physical presence with valid identification. She had asked the manager to note this in the account file. The manager had agreed and had given her a reference number for the notation, which Lorraine had written at the bottom of the second page. The reference number was there in her handwriting, 7 digits, underlined once. She wrote near the end, "I kept the photocopy of the original account card because I wanted you to have proof of what we built together. The account was not large, but we were careful with it for 20 years, and it is yours. Raymond. All of it is yours. I saved it for you. I want you to keep it." The last line of the letter was this. She wrote, "Take the ledger and the card copy and the reference number and go see Mr. Aldrich at the branch. Tell him Lorraine sent you. He will remember." I folded the letter along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. I sat at the kitchen table for a while without moving. Outside, the cardinal had left the fence post. The yard was quiet and brown and waiting for spring the way Ohio yards do, with a patience that does not ask to be acknowledged. Lorraine had known. She had not told me because she had not wanted me to carry it while she was still here and needed me present. She had done what she always did instead. She had prepared. She had gone to the bank. She had spoken to the manager. She had gotten a reference number. She had written it down. She had left me a map. I thought about Derek visiting on my Thursday mornings. I thought about him sitting across from Lorraine in this kitchen, asking her in the careful language of concern whether I would be capable of managing money on my own. I thought about what it cost Lorraine to sit across from her son and answer that question calmly, knowing what she knew, protecting what she had built. I called Gerald at 7:15. I told him we were going to the bank that morning. I told him to bring his identification. He said, "Do you want me to drive?" I told him I would drive this time. I picked Gerald up at 8:45 and we drove to the branch on Merchant Street, the one Lorraine and I had walked into 20 years ago with her pen from home and her blue coat. I parked in the space nearest the side entrance. Inside, I asked for the branch manager by name. The young woman at the desk said Mr. Aldrich had retired the previous year. She said the current manager was a woman named Mrs. Delaney. I said that would be fine. We waited 12 minutes in the chairs near the window. I had the green ledger in my lap. I had the documents from the back cover in a manila envelope I had taken from the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. I had Lorraine letter in my inside coat pocket. Mrs. Delaney came out and introduced herself and led us back to her office. She was perhaps 50, efficient in her movements, with the particular manner of someone who has managed difficult conversations before and does not waste time pretending they are something else. I set the manila envelope on her desk and told her my name and the account number, and told her my name had been removed from the account without my authorization. She pulled up the account on her computer. She looked at the screen for a moment. Then she looked at me with an expression that was careful and still. She said, "Mr. Calloway, there is a change of authority form on file for this account submitted approximately 14 months ago." I said, "I did not submit that form." She said, "The form has a signature." I said, "I know. I would like to see it." She looked at the screen again. She said the form had been submitted in person at this branch. I said, "I was not in this branch 14 months ago. I have not been in this branch since the week of my wife's funeral, which was 16 months ago. I came to make a deposit yesterday and was informed my name had been removed. I am here today with a witness who can confirm the original account opening, a photocopy of the original account card, a notation reference number my wife obtained from your predecessor, Mr. Aldrich, 2 months before her death, and a letter my wife wrote documenting her concerns about unauthorized access to this account." Mrs. Delaney was quiet for a moment. Gerald sat beside me and did not say anything. He did not need to say anything. He was simply there, which was what I had needed him for, the same way he had sat in the bank lobby 30 years ago, reading a fishing magazine, simply present, simply reliable. Mrs. Delaney said she would need to pull the physical form from the records file. I said, "Please take your time." She left the office. Gerald looked at me. I looked at the ledger in my hands. I thought about Lorraine writing reference numbers on the back of a business card while she was ill. I thought about her folding the card and tucking it flat inside the back cover of the ledger so it would not be lost. I thought about Derek explaining routine paperwork over the phone, slowly and patiently, the way you explain things to someone you have decided can no longer keep up. Mrs. Delaney came back into the office with a folder. She opened it on the desk and turned it toward me. The change of authority form was there. The account number was correct. The date was 14 months ago, 6 weeks after Lorraine's funeral. At the bottom of the form, on the signature line designated for the surviving account holder, there was a signature. It was not my signature. It was close. It had the right general shape. Someone had studied my signature and reproduced it with care, the way a person does when they have seen the original many times, and believe that close enough will be sufficient. But I had signed my name for 74 years. I knew every turn of it. That was not my hand. I looked at Mrs. Delaney and I said, "That signature is not mine." I would like to know what identification was presented when this form was submitted. Mrs. Delaney did not answer me immediately. She looked at the form again, then at me, then at the form. She had the expression of someone who has just understood that the conversation she thought she was managing has become something larger than she prepared for that morning. She said she would need to speak with the bank compliance officer before she could share the identification details from the submission. I said that was fine. I told her I was not going anywhere. She excused herself, and Gerald and I sat in her office with the folder open on the desk between us. Gerald looked at the signature on the form without touching it. I had asked him not to touch anything in the folder, and he had nodded and kept his hands in his lap. He said quietly, "That is not your signature, Ray." I said I knew. He said, "I have seen you sign your name on hardware store invoices and delivery receipts and Chamber of Commerce documents for over 20 years. "That is not your hand," I said. "I knew that too." We sat quietly for a few minutes. The bank sounds came through the closed office door, the low murmur of teller windows, a phone ringing twice and stopping, the particular muffled quality of a public building trying to conduct ordinary business while extraordinary things happen in its back offices. I thought about Derek. I thought about him as a boy, 12 years old, standing behind the counter at Callaway Hardware on Saturday mornings when I let him help stock the smaller shelves. He had been careful with the inventory then. He had lined the boxes up evenly and faced the labels outward the way I showed him, not because I demanded it, but because he had wanted to do it right. I had been proud of him for that. I had told Lorraine that evening at the kitchen table that Derek had good instincts for the work. I thought about that boy and the form on the desk in front of me, and I tried to find the line between them, the place where one became the other. I could not find a clean line. That was the hardest part. It was not a clean line. It never is. Mrs. Delaney came back with a second woman she introduced as the branch compliance officer, a younger woman named Mrs. Cho, who carried a notepad and had the focused quality of someone for whom problems are primarily procedural until they are not. Mrs. Cho looked at the form. She looked at me. She asked me to confirm my full legal name and date of birth and current address, which I did. She typed something into a tablet she was carrying. She said, "Mr. Callaway, the form on file was submitted by a man who identified himself as your authorized representative. The identification presented was a power of attorney document." I said, "I have never executed a power of attorney," she said. "The document on file lists Derek James Callaway as your authorized representative." Gerald made a sound beside me, not a word, just a small sound that meant he had heard what I heard. I said, "I did not sign a power of attorney. I have never signed a power of attorney. I do not have an attorney in this county who could have drafted one, because I have not needed an attorney since I closed my business 4 years ago. And the attorney I used for that closing, a man named Mr. Purcell, retired to Florida the following year." Mrs. Cho wrote something on her notepad. I said, "I would like to see the power of attorney document that was submitted." She looked at Mrs. Delaney. Mrs. Delaney gave a small nod. Mrs. Cho produced a second folder and opened it on the desk beside the first. The power of attorney document was 4 pages, official-looking, formatted with legal language that was dense and precise, the kind of document that is designed to appear unquestionable at a glance. The notary seal was at the bottom of the last page. The signature above my printed name was on the 3rd page. I looked at that signature for a long moment. It was the same hand as the change of authority form. Similar construction, similar pressure, similar attempt to reproduce the general shape of my name without having lived inside it for 74 years. I said, "This signature is also not mine, and this notary seal should be verifiable. Notaries keep records of every document they witness. If I did not appear before this notary, the notary record will not show my name." Mrs. Cho looked at the seal. She looked at the notary name and commission number printed beside it. She wrote both down on her notepad. Then she looked up at me and said, "Mr. Callaway, I want to make sure I understand the full scope of what you are telling me." I said, "I am telling you that someone submitted a forged power of attorney to this bank in order to submit a forged change of authority form, and that the result of those 2 forged documents is that my name was removed from an account I opened with my wife 20 years ago, and that the balance of that account, which was $41,000 at the time of my wife's death, has been redirected without my knowledge or consent." The office was quiet for a moment. Gerald sat beside me with his hands in his lap, steady and unhurried, the way he had always been in difficult situations at the store, when a supplier was wrong about an order or a contractor was pushing back on an invoice. Gerald had a quality of stillness that was not passivity. It was the stillness of a person who has decided the facts are sufficient, and that excitement would only clutter them. Mrs. Cho said, "I am going to need to freeze this account pending a full review," I said. "That is appropriate," she said. "I am also going to need to contact our fraud department, and I want to strongly suggest, Mr. Calloway, that you consider contacting the Harwick County Sheriff Office." I said, "I am going to do that this afternoon." She said, "Do you have documentation with you today?" I opened the manila envelope and laid the contents on the desk, the photocopy of the original account card. The reference number Lorraine had obtained from Mr. Aldrich with the date and his notation. The green ledger open to the page showing the balance at the time of Lorraine's death. I did not put Lorraine's letter on the desk. That was mine. That was between Lorraine and me, and I was not ready to make it part of a bank file. Mrs. Cho photographed each document with her tablet. Mrs. Delaney made copies at the machine in the corner of the office. When they finished, Mrs. Cho said, "The notation your wife obtained from Mr. Aldrich is significant. It establishes that a specific request was made by the named account holder before her death that any changes require physical presence and valid identification from the surviving holder. If that notation is in the account file, and I believe it will be, then this branch should not have accepted this form without requiring your physical presence." I said, "It appears that did not happen." She said, "No, it does not appear that it did." She wrote something else on her notepad. I noticed she had underlined something twice. Gerald leaned slightly toward me and said in a low voice, "Lorraine knew what she was doing when she got that reference number." I said, "She always did." I thought about Lorraine driving herself to this bank while she was ill, parking in whatever spot was available because she was alone that day and did not have someone to consider, walking in and asking to speak with the manager, sitting across from Mr. Aldrich, and telling him calmly and clearly that she wanted the account protected. Getting the reference number. Writing it down, she had known Derek would try. She had not known exactly how or when, but she had known the direction he was moving, and she had placed something in his path before she left. I thought about Derek sitting at her kitchen table asking her whether I would be capable of managing money on my own. I thought about her answering him calmly, protecting me from knowing what she was carrying, going to the bank alone the following week. I gathered my copies from Mrs. Delaney and put them back in the manila envelope. I thanked both women for their time. Mrs. Cho gave me a fraud case reference number and her direct phone number and said she would be in contact within 48 hours. Gerald and I walked out through the lobby. The teller who had turned me away the previous morning was at her window. She saw me and looked away quickly, the way people do when they understand that what they witnessed yesterday was larger than it appeared. We got into my car, and I sat for a moment before starting the engine. Gerald said, "What do you want to do now?" I said, "I want to go home and find the number for the county sheriff non-emergency line, and then I want to make a call I have been putting off since yesterday morning." Gerald said, "Derek." I said, "Derek." I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot onto Merchant Street. The trees along the median were just beginning to show the first gray-green of early buds, the kind of tentative color that means Ohio has decided to try spring again, despite having no guarantee it will hold. I had not spoken to Derek since his call about the routine paperwork. I had thanked him. I had told him he was a good son. I thought about what I would say to him now, and I thought about what I would not say, and I thought about the difference between those two things, and why the second list was more important than the first. I did not call Derek that afternoon. I called the county sheriff non-emergency line instead, and spoke with a deputy named Rollins, who listened without interrupting, asked 3 precise questions, and told me a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit would contact me within 2 business days. He took my name and number, and the fraud case reference number Mrs. Cho had given me, and repeated them back correctly, which told me he had written them down. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with the green ledger, and thought about timing. Derek would not know yet that I had been to the bank. Mrs. Cho had not indicated she would contact him, and the account was frozen pending review, which meant any attempt Derek made to access it would be stopped without alerting him to the reason. I had a window of time, not a large one, but enough. I thought about what Derek knew and what he did not know. He knew I had called him about routine paperwork and that I had thanked him. He knew I had not visited the bank in 16 months. He believed, I was reasonably certain, that I had no documentation of the original account terms because the original account card was something Lorraine had preserved privately in the back of the ledger, and Derek had never known the ledger existed. He had been in this kitchen dozens of times over the years and had never once opened that drawer because it was the dish towel drawer, and there was no reason for him to open it. What he did not know was that Lorraine had been to the bank 2 months before she died. He did not know about Mr. Aldrich and the reference number. He did not know about the letter. He did not know that Gerald had driven Lorraine and me to that branch 20 years ago and had sat in the lobby reading a fishing magazine while we signed the original account card. He did not know that Gerald remembered the name of that branch without being prompted. I thought about all the things Derek did not know, and I understood that Lorraine had arranged it that way. She had not told me what she was doing because she had not wanted me to carry it while she was alive and needed me present. But she had also, I realized, sitting at that table, not told Derek what she had done. She had let him believe the ground was clear. She had let him walk forward on it. I opened the ledger to the last page Lorraine had written in. The final entry was from the month before she died. The balance was written in her handwriting, careful and unhurried as always. Beside the balance she had written one note. The note said, "I sat with that for a long time." The phone rang at 4:30 in the afternoon. I looked at the screen and saw Derek's name. I let it ring twice more before I answered. He said, "Dad, hey. Just checking in. How are you doing?" His voice had the particular warmth he used when he was managing something, a warmth that was slightly too deliberate, that arrived slightly too quickly, the way a salesman smiles before you have said anything worth smiling about. I said I was doing fine. I asked how Sandra was. I asked how things were in Columbus. He said everything was good. He said work had been busy. He said Sandra sent her love. Then he said, "I wanted to make sure you got my message about the account paperwork last week. I know it can be confusing dealing with all the financial stuff after Mom. I just want to make sure everything feels settled for you." I said, "I appreciate that, Derek." He said, "You know, Sandra and I have been talking, and we think it might make sense at some point to sit down together and go over your finances more broadly, just to make sure everything is organized the way it should be. We want to make sure you are taken care of." I said, "That is kind of you." He said, "We could come up next weekend if that works. Make a day of it, go to lunch, sit down with your paperwork, just get everything in order." I thought about the phrase, "get everything in order." I thought about what order meant to Derek and what it meant to me. I said, "Next weekend might work. Let me think about it and get back to you." He said, "Sounds great, Dad, and hey, if you have any questions about the account stuff, anything that seems confusing, just call me." "That is what I am here for," I said. "I know that, Derek. Thank you." We said goodbye, and I set the phone on the table. I sat for a moment, and then I got up and went to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. I had kept every piece of paper related to the hardware store in that cabinet. 31 years of invoices, tax records, supplier contracts, employee records, insurance policies, Chamber of Commerce correspondence. I had kept them because Lorraine had said once that a business record was evidence of a life taken seriously, and I had agreed with her, and I had never thrown any of it away. I pulled the bottom drawer open. My signature appeared on thousands of documents in that cabinet. Derek knew that. Derek had grown up watching me sign my name on purchase orders and invoices and contractor agreements. He had watched me sign the closing papers on the store 4 years ago in this same room with the filing cabinet open behind me. I thought about the signature on the change of authority form, the practiced shape of it, the careful reproduction of the general structure, without the specific weight that comes from a lifetime of signing the same name. I thought about Derek watching me sign things for 30 years and deciding that was enough. I took several documents from the cabinet, ones with my authentic signature, and placed them in the manila envelope with the other documents. A detective would need comparison signatures. I would have them ready. Gerald called at 6 in the evening. He said he had been thinking about Derek calling him 3 weeks after the funeral. asking whether Gerald had seen me sign anything at the bank. I said I had been thinking about that too. Gerald said, "Ray, he called me because I drove you to open that account. He knew I was there. He was checking whether I could place you at the bank doing something legitimate. He was covering the ground before he used that power of attorney document." I said, "That is what I think too." Gerald said, "He knew I drove you places. He probably thought I was still driving you." I thought about that. Derek had assumed Gerald was still taking me places because Derek had decided his father was the kind of man who needed to be driven. He had mapped out his plan using a version of me that did not exist. An old man who could not manage his own finances, who did not read account statements, who would accept routine paperwork over the phone without investigating, who did not know about the green ledger in the kitchen drawer. He had planned around a man I was not. Gerald said, "What do we do when the detective calls?" I said, "We tell the truth in the order it happened, and we let the detective do their work." Gerald said, "And Derek coming next weekend?" I thought about Derek offering to come up and get everything in order. I thought about him sitting at this kitchen table with Sandra, going through my paperwork with the manner of people conducting a review they had already decided the outcome of. I said, "Let him come." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want him to walk in here not knowing?" I said, "Lorraine let him walk forward on clear ground that was not as clear as he believed." "I think I can do the same," Gerald said. "She would have said that was fair." I said, "She would have said it was practical." I went to bed that night with the manila envelope on the kitchen table and Lorraine letter in my shirt pocket the way I had carried it every day since I opened it. The house was quiet. The furnace ran its night cycle. Somewhere outside a dog was barking at something that had moved in the dark along the edge of somebody's yard. I thought about Derek driving up from Columbus next weekend with Sandra beside him, the two of them having agreed in the car, on the drive up, what they would say and how they would say it, and what they expected me to agree to. I thought about what they would find when they arrived. I thought about the green ledger on the kitchen table, open to the last page. The page where Lorraine had written beside the final balance, in her careful, unhurried handwriting, "Raymond will know what to do." I had not known when I read it the first time. I was beginning to know now. The detective called Thursday morning. Her name was Detective Arlen, from the Harwick County Sheriff Financial Crimes Unit, and she had a manner that reminded me of Lorraine in certain practical ways, direct without being unkind, efficient without being cold, someone who had learned that the fastest way through a difficult conversation was to say the true thing first and let the other details arrange themselves around it. She came to the house rather than asking me to come to the sheriff's office. She said it was easier to review documents at the location where they were kept, which I appreciated both for the practicality of it and for the fact that it saved me from sitting in a waiting room. She arrived at 9 in the morning, and I had coffee ready, and Gerald was already at the kitchen table, because I had called him the previous evening and asked him to be there. Detective Arlen sat across from us and opened a folder of her own and set a small recording device on the table and asked my permission to use it, which I gave. She explained that she had already been in contact with the bank fraud department and had reviewed the case file Mrs. Cho had opened. She said, "Mr. Calloway, the bank has confirmed that the notation your wife obtained from Mr. Aldrich is present in the account file. The notation is dated and carries his employee identification number. It specifies that any change of authority requires the physical presence of the surviving account holder with valid government-issued identification." I said, "And the change of authority form that was submitted?" She said the form was submitted in person at the branch by a man presenting a power of attorney document and a state-issued identification card bearing your name and photograph. The teller who processed the submission has been interviewed. She described the man as approximately 45 to 50 years of age, average build, wearing a gray jacket. She said he was calm and prepared and had all the documents organized when he approached the window. I thought about that description. Approximately 45 to 50. Derek was 46. Detective Arlen said, "The power of attorney document has been sent to our document examination unit. Preliminary review indicates the notary seal is fraudulent. The commission number on the seal does not match any active or inactive notary registered in this state under the name printed on the document." Gerald made the same small sound he had made in Mrs. Delaney's office. I said, "A fabricated notary seal." She said, "That appears to be the case. We are also examining the signature on both the power of attorney and the change of authority form. I will need to compare them against verified authentic signatures. You mentioned you have documents with your signature from your business records." I opened the manila envelope and laid the hardware store documents on the table. 31 years of invoices and contracts and tax records, my signature on every one, consistent and unhurried, the signature of a man who had signed his name seriously and often on things that mattered. Detective Arlen photographed each signature carefully, methodically, without rushing. Then she looked at the comparison photographs she had brought from the bank file, the signatures on the forged documents, and she looked at my authentic signatures, and she did not say anything for a moment, which told me the difference was visible even without a laboratory examination. She said, "Mr. Calloway, I want to ask you about the account balance. The bank records show the balance at the time of the change of authority was $38,000 and some dollars, reduced from $41,000 at the time of your wife's death. Are you aware of what reduced the balance in the 6 weeks between your wife's death and the submission of the change of authority form?" I said I was not aware of any withdrawals during that period. She said, "There were 4 withdrawals in that 6-week window. Each was made at an ATM in the Columbus area. Each was for the daily maximum withdrawal limit." I looked at her. She said, "The card used was a secondary account card. Bank records show a secondary card was requested and issued approximately 3 years before your wife's death, added to the account by one of the named account holders." I said, "I did not request a secondary card." She said, "The request was made in writing by mail using an address in Columbus. The card was mailed to that address." Gerald said, "Ray," I said, "I know. 3 years before Lorraine died, Derek had requested a secondary card on the account using a Columbus address, which meant he had been accessing the account for at least 3 years before Lorraine passed. The 4 maximum withdrawals in the 6 weeks after her funeral were not the beginning of what Derek had done. They were the end of a process he had started years earlier, carefully and incrementally, in amounts and intervals designed not to create alarm. I thought about the monthly balances in the green ledger. I thought about the balance dropping slowly over those years, not dramatically, not in a way that would have caused Lorraine to panic, but consistently, in small movements that she had noted faithfully every first of the month in her careful handwriting, without knowing what was causing them. I said, "Detective Arlen, there is a green ledger on this table that my wife kept for 20 years. Every balance she recorded is in that ledger. If you compare the balances against the bank records, you will see when the withdrawals began." She looked at the ledger. I opened it to the pages from 3 years ago and showed her the entries. She photographed each page. Then she looked at the final entry, the last page Lorraine had written in, the balance and the note beside it. She read the note, "Raymond will know what to do." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your wife was a careful woman, Mr. Calloway." I said she was the most careful person I have ever known. Detective Arlen closed her folder and looked at me directly. She said, "Based on what we have reviewed this morning, I am prepared to move forward with a criminal referral to the county prosecutor office. The evidence supports potential charges including forgery, fraud, identity theft, and unlawful access to a financial account. I want to be transparent with you about what that means. It means this will become a formal criminal matter. It will move at the pace of the legal system, which is not always fast. It may be uncomfortable for your family," I said. "I understand that," she said. "Is there anything you want to tell me before I proceed that you think I should know?" I thought for a moment. I said, "My son is planning to come here next weekend. He called me earlier this week to offer to help me get my finances in order. He does not know I have been to the bank. He does not know you are involved." Detective Arlen looked at me steadily. She said, "Mr. Calloway, I am going to ask you not to confront him directly before we have completed the referral process. I want you to understand that anything said in a direct confrontation could affect the case." I said, "I have no intention of confronting him. I intend to let him come." She said, And when he arrives, I said, I intend to sit at this kitchen table and let him tell me what he came to tell me, and I intend to listen, and I intend to say very little, and I intend to remember everything. Gerald said quietly, Same as always, Ray. Detective Arlen looked between us. Then she wrote something in her folder and capped her pen. She said, I will need Mr. Pitt's contact information as a potential witness to the original account opening. Gerald gave her his name, address, and phone number without being asked twice. She gathered her documents and the recording device and stood up. At the door she paused and said, Your wife left you good tools, Mr. Calloway. I said, She left me everything I needed. I just had to find it. After she left, Gerald and I sat at the kitchen table without speaking for a while. The coffee had gone cold. The green ledger was still open to the last page. I looked at Lorraine's final note. I thought about her sitting at this table 20 years ago, opening a new ledger to its first blank page, writing the opening balance in her careful blue ink. I thought about her sitting at this same table for 20 years on the first of every month, recording the balance, writing small notes beside the numbers, building a record that was also, I understood now, a kind of testimony. She had not known exactly what she was building it against. She had only known that a record was a promise you made to yourself, and that promises made in good faith had a way of mattering precisely when you needed them most. Gerald said, What do you need me to do before next weekend? I said, I need you to come for dinner Saturday evening. 6 o'clock. He looked at me. I said, Derek will be here. Sandra will be here. I want you at the table. Gerald said, I will be there. I closed the green ledger and set it in the center of the kitchen table where Lorraine had always kept the things that mattered, in plain sight, exactly where they belonged. Derek and Sandra arrived at 12:30 on Saturday. I had known they would be early. Derek had always arrived early to things he had prepared for, because arriving early gave him time to assess the room before the conversation began. I had noticed this about him for years without naming it until now. I heard the car in the driveway, and I did not go to the window. I stayed at the kitchen table with my coffee and waited for the knock. Sandra came in first, which was also something I had noticed before. She moved ahead of Derek in situations where she had decided the outcome, the way a person walks into a room they already consider theirs. She was carrying a bakery box tied with string, the kind of offering that is designed to create an atmosphere of normalcy before normalcy has been established. She said, Raymond, it is so good to see you. You look well. I said she looked well too, which was true, and I meant it without warmth. Derek came in behind her and shook my hand the way he had been shaking my hand for the past several years, firmly, briefly, the handshake of a man transacting rather than greeting. He looked around the kitchen the way he always did when he arrived, a quick assessment, taking inventory without appearing to. His eyes moved to the kitchen table. The green ledger was on the table, the manila envelope was beside it, a legal pad with my handwritten notes was beside that. 3 coffee cups were set out, not 2. Derek looked at the 3 cups. I said, Gerald is joining us for dinner. He will. Be here at 6. I thought we could talk this afternoon and then have a meal together. Derek looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes that he contained quickly. He said, Sure, Dad, that sounds fine. We sat down. Sandra set the bakery box on the counter without opening it. She sat beside Derek and folded her hands on the table in a way that suggested she had rehearsed the posture. Derek said, So, Dad, we wanted to talk to you about getting a clearer picture of where things stand financially, just to make sure everything is organized the way it should be. We have been worried about you managing everything on your own since Mom passed. I said, I appreciate the concern. He said, We thought it might make sense to consolidate some things, simplify the picture. At your age, having someone you trust managing the details just makes everything easier. I said, What details did you have in mind? He said, Well, the accounts, the house, the insurance policies. Just making sure everything is set up so that if anything happens, there is no confusion about who handles what. I said, That sounds like a power of attorney arrangement. He said, Something like that. Or we could look at adding me to the accounts directly. Just to have oversight, I said. Adding you to the accounts, he said. Just for practical reasons, Dad. Just so things are smooth. I looked at him for a moment. I said, Derek, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. He said, Sure, Dad, of course. I said, When did you open the secondary account card on the joint account your mother and I held at the branch on Merchant Street? The kitchen was very quiet. Sandra looked at Derek. Derek looked at me. The color in his face changed in a way he could not control, a slow shift, the kind that happens when a body understands something before the mind has decided how to respond to it. He said, "Dad, I do not know what you are talking about." I said, "The secondary card was requested by mail approximately 3 years before your mother died. It was sent to a Columbus address. Withdrawals were made from that card at Columbus area ATMs over a period of years, and then 4 maximum daily withdrawals were made in the 6 weeks after your mother's funeral." Derek said, "Dad, I think there might be some confusion." I said, "There is also a change of authority form on file at that bank, submitted 14 months ago, removing my name from the account. The form carries a signature that is not mine. The form was accompanied by a power of attorney document carrying a notary seal that does not correspond to any registered notary in this state." Sandra put her hand on Derek's arm. Derek said, "Dad, I was only trying to help you. You were not in a position to manage things on your own. Mom knew that too, at the end. She was worried about you." I said, "Your mother was not worried about me, Derek. Your mother was worried about the account. She went to that bank 2 months before she died and spoke with the branch manager and obtained a notation in the account file specifying that any change of authority required my physical presence with valid identification. She kept the reference number in the back of this ledger. I put my hand on the green ledger but did not open it." Derek looked at the ledger. I said, "She also left me a letter. She wrote about your visits on my Thursday mornings. She wrote about your questions regarding whether I could manage money on my own. She wrote that a person who asks that question once is concerned, and a person who asks it a second time is planning." Derek said, "Dad," I said, "a detective from the Horwick County Financial Crimes Unit was at this table on Thursday morning. The bank fraud case has been referred to the county prosecutor office. The document examination unit has reviewed the signatures on the power of attorney and the change of authority form and compared them against 31 years of my authentic business signatures. The notary seal has been identified as fabricated." Sandra stood up. She said, "Raymond, we should all take a breath before anyone says anything that." I said, "Sandra, please sit down." She sat down. I looked at Derek. His face had gone through several expressions in the past few minutes and had arrived at something that was neither defiance nor apology. It was the expression of a man who has been planning for a long time and has just understood that the ground he planned on was not what he believed it to be, and that there is no version of the next several minutes that goes the way he prepared for. He said, "Dad, I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. Sandra and I got into some debt and I made some decisions that I should not have made, and I needed to stabilize things. I was going to put it all back before you noticed." I said. "Your mother noticed." He did not say anything, I said. "She sat across from you at this table and answered your questions calmly and drove herself to the bank the following week while she was ill. Because she noticed, Derek, she noticed everything. She kept a record of every balance in this ledger for 20 years, and somewhere in the middle of those years the balance began moving in a direction she could not account for, and she knew why, and she did not tell me because she did not want me to carry it while she was sick and needed me present." My voice was even throughout. I had not raised it. I did not intend to raise it. I said, "She called what she kept in this ledger a promise she made to herself. She made it for 20 years, and then she left it in the drawer where she knew I would eventually find it because she knew me, and she knew that when I found it I would know what it meant, and I would know what to do." Derek put his face in his hands. Sandra looked at the table. I said, "I am not going to tell you what happens next in the legal process because I do not fully know yet and because it is no longer mine to control. I referred this matter to the proper authorities and they are doing their work. What I am going to tell you is this," I said. "Your mother saved for 20 years. She sat at this table on the 1st of every month, and she opened this ledger and she wrote the balance and she made small notes about what the money had been used for. And some of those notes were about you, your car loan, things we helped with that we never mentioned. She never told you because she did not want you to feel the weight of being helped. She only wanted you to be all right." I stopped for a moment, then I said, That is what she used to say. I only want them to be all right. She said it about you, and she said it about Paula, and she said it the way she said everything that mattered to her without announcement at the kitchen table when it was just the two of us. Derek did not look up. I said, "You were not all right, Derek. I do not know when that started or what I missed, but I know that whatever debt or fear or pressure you were under, you chose to take from your mother's savings instead of asking for help. You chose to come to this table and ask her if her husband was capable of managing his own money, and you chose to use her death as the moment to move." I stood up and went to the counter and poured myself a glass of water. Outside the kitchen window, the yard was coming back after the long Ohio winter. The garden bed along the back fence had green coming up in the corners, tentative and determined, the way things come back when the ground finally decides the season has changed. I drank my water and looked at the yard. Behind me, Derek said, "Dad, I am sorry." I said, "I know you are." I did not say anything else for a long time, and neither did he. And the kitchen was quiet in the particular way it gets when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. And when the people in the room understand that the next thing will not come quickly, and that some things do not resolve themselves at a kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, no matter how long you sit there. At 6 o'clock, Gerald knocked on the front door. I went and let him in. He looked at my face, and then he looked past me into the kitchen, where Derek and Sandra were still sitting at the table, and he did not say anything. He just came in and hung his coat on the hook by the door, the way he had done 1,000 times in this house, and he followed me back to the kitchen, and he sat down in the chair that had always been his chair. When he came to dinner, the one beside the window, the one Lorraine had always set a place for without being asked, I put the kettle on. We would eat, we would sit at this table, and whatever happened after that would happen in its own time, in the offices of prosecutors and banks and county courthouses, moving at the pace it moved, indifferent to how any of us felt about the waiting. Lorraine had waited too. She had waited and prepared and written things down and tucked them flat inside the back cover of a green ledger in the kitchen drawer, and she had trusted that the ground she prepared would hold when someone finally needed to stand on it. It had held. The county prosecutor filed charges against Derek in the second week of April. I learned about it from Detective Arlen, who called on a Wednesday morning, while I was in the backyard turning over the soil, in the garden bed along the back fence, the one Lorraine had kept for the better part of 2 decades. I had not tended it since she died. I had looked at it every day from the kitchen window and told myself I would get to it, and I had not gotten to it. And then one morning in April I had put on my work gloves and gone out and started turning the soil because the ground was finally soft enough, and there was no good reason to wait any longer. Detective Arlen said the charges included forgery, fraud, identity theft, and unlawful access to a financial account. She said Derek had retained an attorney in Columbus, and that the process would move at its own pace through the court system. She said the bank had completed its fraud review and had determined that the change of authority had been improperly processed, that the notation Lorraine had obtained from Mr. Aldrich had been present in the account file and had not been followed, and that the bank had accepted responsibility for the procedural failure. She said the account would be restored to my name, and that the bank had agreed to a full restoration of the balance drawn down by the secondary card over the period of unauthorized access, plus the 4 withdrawals made after Lorraine's funeral. I said, "All of it," she said, "all of it, Mr. Calloway." I thanked her and stood in the garden for a moment after she hung up, holding my phone in my work glove, looking at the turned soil. Lorraine had grown tomatoes along the back fence every summer. She had grown them from seed in small cups on the kitchen windowsill starting in late February, and she had moved them to the bed in May when the ground was reliably warm, and she had staked them with old wooden dowels from the hardware store that I had cut to length for her every spring. The dowels were still in the garage, leaning against the wall beside the workbench, the ones from the last season she had planted, still tied with the green garden twine she had used. I went back inside and washed my hands and sat at the kitchen table. Paula had called the previous week. She had heard from Derek, she said, and she did not know what to say to me, and she understood if I did not want to talk to her. Her voice on the phone had been quiet and careful, the voice of someone who has been sitting with guilt long enough that it has stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like a condition. I had told her I was glad she called. She had asked if she could come and see me, and I had said yes, and she had come on a Thursday afternoon and sat across from me at the kitchen table and cried in the way that people cry when they are not performing sadness but simply unable to contain it. She said, "Dad, I knew Derek was under financial pressure. I knew he had been borrowing from somewhere. I did not know it was your account. I want you to know that I did not know." I said, "I believe you, Paula." She said, "I should have asked more questions. I should have said something to you." I said, "You did not know what questions to ask because Derek did not tell you enough to know. That is on Derek, not on you." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the same gesture she had made as a child when she was trying not to cry fully, trying to keep the grief contained to a manageable size. She said, "Mom would be so angry." I thought about that. I thought about whether Lorraine would have been angry, and I decided that was not quite right. Lorraine would have been deeply, quietly sad. She would have sat at this table, and she would have been sad in the way she was sad about serious things, without theater, without speeches, with only the kind of still careful grief that meant she was thinking about how something had gone wrong and what it had cost. I said, "Your mother would have been sad, and then she would have figured out what to do next, and she would have done it." Paula looked at the green ledger on the table. I had kept it there since the morning I found it in the drawer. I had not moved it back. It belonged on the table the way certain things belong in plain sight once you understand what they are, Paula said. She kept that the whole time. I said, 20 years, Paula said. She never told me about it, I said. She kept it for me. She knew I would need it, and she kept it where I would find it, and she trusted me to know what to do with it. Paula was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am sorry, Dad. I am sorry for all of it. I am sorry I did not protect you when I could have," I said. "You are here now. That counts for something." I did not tell her it counted for everything because it did not. Some of what had happened could not be repaired by a Thursday afternoon visit and genuine tears, but some of it could be met with the same patient care Lorraine had brought to difficult things, and I intended to try. Gerald came for dinner on Friday evenings now, a habit we had settled into without formally deciding it. He brought bread from the bakery on Clement Street, the kind with the thick crust that Lorraine had liked, and I made whatever I had planned to make, and we sat at the table and ate and talked about ordinary things. The weather, the garden, the people from the old Chamber of Commerce group, the hardware store that had opened on the east side of Harwick that sold the same things I had sold, but with more lighting and less knowledge. On the Friday after Detective Arlen called, Gerald came at 6 and I told him about the charges and the bank restoration, and he sat with that information for a moment, the way he always sat with important information, quietly, letting it settle before he said anything about it. He said, "Lorraine would have been glad the reference number worked." I said, "She would have said she knew it would work," he said. "She would have said that, yes." We ate dinner, and the evening came on slowly the way April evenings do in Ohio, holding the light longer than you expect, reluctant to give it up, as if the season has finally decided to stay and wants to make the most of the hours it has. After Gerald left, I sat at the kitchen table alone for a while. I opened the green ledger to the last page. I took a pen from the drawer next to the dish towels, and I wrote the date at the top of the next blank line. I wrote the current balance, the restored balance, the number that represented 20 years of Lorraine careful saving, returned in full. Beside the balance, I wrote a note. The note said, "Lorraine, I found it. I knew what to do." I closed the ledger and set it in the center of the table. Outside the kitchen window, the yard held the last of the April light. The garden bed along the back fence was turned and ready. On the windowsill above the sink, in the same small cups Lorraine had always used, the first tomato seedlings were standing in their soil, pale green and new, leaning slightly toward the last of the light the way young things do when the season has finally changed and the ground is warm enough to trust. I left them there and went to bed.